Well, welcome back to Finance Uncut. On today's episode, the global elites destroying the economy. So I've done some videos about the World Economic Forum. I did this one not too long ago. The New World Order is coming. I also talked about Fed Powell saying how we aren't going back to what we had before. In this video I did, the economy is finished. And now I want to provide more of an update since then, where I believe the global elites are destroying the economy, and their whole Great Reset plan, their Build Back Better, their You'll Own Nothing and You'll Be Happy is getting closer and closer and closer. And so I wanted to go into a bit of a deep dive and see if we can connect some dots. I've got a spoiler alert for you folks from the World Economic Forum in their 16th edition Insight Report entitled The Global Risks Report 2021. It's quite dystopian, but Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum predict corporate and government use of novel brain digital interfaces and neurochemical drugs to control global populations in midst of anarchic civil collapse, supply chain collapse, and global war sparked by use of micronukes in 2022-2024. His words, not mine. Also, I'd say, have you seen or heard about these supply chain issues that are impacting energy supply at the moment, fuels, and food? And also, I'll just remind you guys, what caused the Arab Spring in 2011? I'll give you a clue. Food prices and food shortages. And folks, this is probably the most important thread that I could do a whole video on this. However, my video probably wouldn't last very long on this platform if I was to go through this thread. Now, I'll put a link in the description below to this thread, but I'll just, it just links everything that I've been doing over the last 12 months, 18 months, 2 years really, is just trying to connect the dots to see where this is all playing out. We're seeing all the warning signs, but it's right there in front of our faces. And it's not conspiracy theories. It is these people, these elites, saying it out of their own mouths, publishing it in their own documents, on their own websites. You don't have to believe me. You can go and click on these links. You can go onto their website. You can listen to their own voices with it coming out of their own mouths about what their plans are and their connections to one another. You know, this is a long thread, and to be honest, you will want to put aside a solid hour or so of going through it and reading all these documents and watching some of the videos in this thread if you really want to know what's going on and what these people are planning right now as we speak and over the coming months, years, and this following decade ahead. So I'll put a link in the description below to this thread. And I thought I'd let you know that the World Economic Forum blocked me on Twitter because, you know, they don't like honest debate. They don't like people pointing out their hypocrisy and their evil plans. And speaking of evil, I thought I'd share this picture of Klaus. Yep, it pretty much sums him up as a Dark Lord Sith. I thought Zuby summed up the Great Reset Build Back Better plan better than anyone else. I'll let you guys read that. I'm not going to say it out loud. Yep, that should give you enough time to read it. I love this tweet from George. Biden pitches Great Reset agenda, Build Back Better, in a room full of Legos and children's books. which is appropriate because you'd need to have the critical thinking ability of a child to not see how this agenda will lead to an economic collapse. 100% spot on. This is what we're heading for, folks. Economic collapse. Mark my words. Bank of England tells ministers to intervene on digital currency programming. Peter Sweden's reporting that digital cash could be programmed to ensure it is only spent on essentials or goods which an employer or government deems to be sensible. Welcome to the Great Reset. So I'm sure you all know this guy. Yeah, he's pretty well known. What is a central bank digital currency, you ask? Oh, just a useful policy tool for casually annihilating the savings of every wage worker in the country if they don't spend them fast enough. Now, I was called a conspiracy theorist 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, when I started talking about central bank digital currencies and how it could be used and how I think they will use them. And once again, I guess I should, instead of being called a conspiracy theorist, I should be called a spoiler alerter, if that makes sense. Now, if this, creeps you out, I don't know if you guys have heard of positive money. So something that you may not have heard of yet is a thing called positive money. Now, Professor Richard Werner, who is probably the global expert economist on the banking system, says positive money campaigns for the abolition of banks, the abolition of cash, and the implementation of microchips into your body with central planning controls over most aspects of your life, needless to mention, favours a permanent lockdown to save the climate. And another spoiler, government-controlled digital currency issued directly by the Bank of England, reshaping the way people interact with money and payments. Link with that thing, and you have a social credit system. Now, let's have a look at this little clip.
Today, I'm proud to say that under the UK's presidency, the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money, a bit like a digital banknote that could be used alongside physical notes and coins. Unlike most of the digital money people use daily today, it would be issued directly by a central bank, like the Bank of England in the UK. And governments and central banks across the world are working together, looking into what having a digital currency might mean in practice. This includes issues that people care about, such as ensuring users' money would be safe and secure, that it could work with other ways to pay, would be energy efficient and available to everyone. A potential CBDC could offer businesses and consumers new ways to pay in the future. It's all part of the wider story of digital innovation that has delivered benefits to millions around the world and in the UK. The decision on whether to launch a central bank digital currency is for each country to make, and no G7 jurisdiction has yet made that choice. These decisions raise important questions about the reshaping of our economy, financial systems, and the way in which people interact with money and payments. That's why working together and careful evaluation with our international partners is essential. In the UK, earlier this year, I announced a new joint task force between the Treasury and the Bank of England to look into a potential CBDC as a complement to cash and bank deposits. We're also hearing from firms, technology experts and others. Under the leadership of the UK, this report today will help support and inform exploration of CBDCs in the G7 and beyond. With these principles, the G7 is leading an important step change in the global policy conversation. The report covers a range of important matters, such as financial stability, cyber resilience, energy efficiency, privacy, inclusion, and tackling illicit finance. These factors should all be considered when designing and potentially delivering a CBDC that would be fit for the future. Our shared objective is to ensure that CBDCs would be grounded in long-standing commitments to transparency, the rule of law, and sound economic governance. The G7 will continue its work in this important area, working with others to enhance understanding and use of these principles. We're excited to be taking a leading role with G7 members in publishing this exploratory work, bringing money and finance into the 21st century.
Mark my words, folks, we are going to see central bank digital currencies. And when that happens, the central planners will be able to control so much of our lives that the liberties and freedoms that we once knew will no longer be. And I've done videos on this and how central bank digital currencies will be able to control our lives. I'm not going to go into that in this video. But it is very scary and very Orwellian. And for my Aussie viewers, I don't know if you guys remember back in the 80s when we had that contentious political issue about Prime Minister Bob Hawke's proposal for the Australia card, which the Liberals, and here in Australia, for my American viewers, the Liberal Party is like the Republican Party. The Libs campaigned hard against it, and even the Australian Labor Party, which is like the Democrats, called it the Stalin card, and that was defeated. However, now we are being encouraged or being pushed by the current Australian government, so-called Liberal government, Conservative government, a digital identity from the Australian government. How nice of them.
Healthcare professionals have said to me, if you think COVID is bad, when it comes to climate change, you ain't seen nothing yet. It's the grandmother of all health threats. COVID and climate change are compounding each other, and they're adding pressures on already weak health systems and staff. And it's why business as usual is not an option. And it's why now we need to truly have health at the centre of all our policies: energy, transport, agriculture, water and food.
Now, this is interesting. Monsanto, all right? Between 1996 and 2003, Monsanto acquired more than 70 seed companies before the firm was itself acquired by a competing company called Bayer in 2018. Now, Monsanto controls the majority of food production in the US. And now Bayer owns Monsanto. Bayer is also a corporate partner of the World Economic Forum. And Mr. Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the US. And we know, the push that's happening around this sector and all this sort of stuff, which I shall not name. And one US farm feeds 166 people annually in the US and abroad. Global population is expected to increase by 2.2 billion by 2050, which means the world's farmers will have to grow about 70% more food than what is now produced. So thinking about all that, okay, and the whole climate movement, by 2050 we'll need 70% more food from agriculture. However, we just saw the emissions from agriculture. Or we need less people. Think about that. And Larry Fink, CEO and chairman of Blackrock, says inflation in the food sector, already running hot, is set to go vertical. Combination of higher costs, lack of supply, labour shortages, and broken logistics has set in motion a crisis which can no longer be avoided. Prepare accordingly. He goes on and says it's important to recognise that net zero demands a transformation of the entire economy. Sounds very similar to what Klaus and the World Economic Forum are wanting. Now, folks, we're on the cusp of a significant mass starvation event of our own making. Soon, tens of millions of the world's most impoverished people will die from an inability to feed themselves, while many of those comfortably getting by now, especially in the Western world, are in for a major shock. And don't believe me? Okay, check this out. And in this UN report, global lockdown policy pushes over 150 million into starvation. There was a dramatic worsening of world hunger in 2020, pushing trends in malnutrition back 15 years. And Kraft Heinz CEO says consumers need to prepare for permanent increase in food prices. What's that? Permanent increase in food prices. Now, I don't know if you can see this all that well. Bjorn Lomborg, you can see actually it was retweeted by Dr. Jordan Peterson, who said, pay attention to this man, which I agree. Now, Bjorn Lomborg is a believer in anthropogenic, the word I cannot say. But Bjorn Lomborg deals with reality, with a rational mind and common sense. Now, he's talking that if we are to go to this word, okay, then it's going to cost more than $11,300 per person per year in 2050, according to the Nature study. That's almost 500 times as much as average Americans are willing to pay. He says that won't end well. And I agree. This is not going to end well. And I have to think, is this a purposeful policy of introducing all this stuff? Because it doesn't make any economic sense. It doesn't add up. And I don't believe these people are stupid. I really don't. They can't be that dumb. So it has to be something else. So I have to be very careful what I say on this platform now about this particular subject. I've shared in other videos that you guys should be following Chris McIntosh from Capital Exploits, who understands this sector and this space very well from a fund manager, an investment point of view. And Alex Epstein, if you guys don't follow him, please do so. Buy his book as well. He knows what he's talking about in this space. But back in June, he tweeted, by starving cost-effective energy of capital, the ESG movement is engaging in a fundamental act of mass destruction. Energy is the industry that powers every other industry. By making energy more expensive, ESG makes everything more expensive, hurting the poorest people the most. And then he said, sometimes it sucks to be right. What I warned about in June is playing out right now. The ESG movement's deprivation of capital to cost-effective energy producers, making energy much more expensive, which makes everything much more expensive, which hurts and kills the poor. And this is my argument, is Australia's about to sign up to net zero emissions at this COP26 meeting. What does all this mean? Just have a look at what's happening in Europe and China at the moment with the energy crisis. Energy is everything. Energy is foundation for life. It is so important. It is so important to an economy. And remember, the economy isn't some abject, this thing. The economy is human beings. It is human action, as Mises put it. Acting and making personal choices, and choices that are subjective. And as we get rid of cheap, reliable baseload power and replace it with, you know what? We're going to see more and more businesses, manufacturers, producers of goods and producers of things like food close down, which means we're going to see food shortages. We're going to see higher energy costs. And Alex is right. This is going to hurt the poor the most. And as you know from the United Nations, they're warning of mass starvation. And even Blackrock, same thing. Yet Blackrock is blackmailing Australia and other countries and companies if you don't sign up and prove your virtue to Gaia that, your access to funding may be lacking, or at least coming at a much higher cost. And from Alex again, we're not running out of oil, we're running into oil. Why? Because Earth contains 10 times more oil than we've used in the entire history of civilization, and we keep getting better at extracting it cost effectively. And coming in from the Financial Times, China's energy crisis threatens lengthy disruption to global supply chain. What does this mean? Expect more shortages of goods and much, much higher prices. And the IMF warns on inflation, says the Fed and others should be prepared to tighten policy. Monetary policy may need to be tightened to get ahead of price pressures, even if that delays the employment recovery, the report said. Well, isn't this interesting? There is more and more talk in these global bodies and the media about inflation and the need to rise or raise interest rates. So are we seeing the PR and the psychology being pushed out there to prepare people for higher interest rates, which could burst this debt-fueled asset bubble? And coming in from Bloomberg, the Fed may not be so eager to rescue the stock market this time around, according to Bank of America strategists. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there is a talk that what's happening around the world is a copy of Japan in the 1980s, produce a purposeful bubble in asset prices funneled by debt, and then you burst that thing. And this is a way that the World Economic Forum can have their little great reset, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, is if you purposefully build up a bubble like they did in Japan and then burst it, and then people are left with debts that they cannot pay, assets that are worth less than what they owe. Well, the central planners come along and say, no worries, look, we'll take that pain off you. You hand over your assets and we'll forgive your debts. And then you can rent from us and, you'll be happy. I don't know. And coming in from Zero Hedge, IMF issues global stagflation alert, cuts global GDP as it warns of rising inflation and dangerous divergence. In its latest World Economic Outlook report, published on Tuesday morning, the IMF voiced its starkest caution about stagflation yet, warning that the global economic recovery has lost momentum and become increasingly divided as it warned about the rising inflation risks. And pointing to this dangerous divergence in economic prospects across countries, the IMF said that this remains a major concern. While the IMF trimmed its growth outlook, it also warned that the global economy is entering a phase of inflationary risk and called on central banks to be very, very vigilant and take early action to tighten monetary policy should price pressures prove persistent. And according to the IMF, there is a lot of dark red, very dark red in that map. And this is something I've been warning about for 18 months now, or at least the last 12 months, that we are going to have a lot of inflationary pressures. And I've been very forthright in saying that our underlying economy, the fundamentals, is very sick. It's built on a debt Ponzi scheme. The old wealth effect is really, let's just go and borrow more. Asset prices rise, we feel wealthier, so we go borrow more to consume. Consume literally means to destroy. So think about that. We have a very dodgy economy, and we are the puppets. We, the consumers, we, the people in the economy, are the puppets for the elite. So we've got inflation everywhere, literally everywhere. Germany's wholesale price is the highest it's been since the 70s. And the producer price index by commodity is over 20%. Once again, we got to go back to 70s to get this sort of level. And, with CPI up and shelter being 25% of CPI, which the government data says is only, up 3.2%, when the national median rent has actually increased by 16.4% or something. We know the CPI numbers are dodgy, and that's why I call it CPI. Some others have got some pretty cool names for it as well. And while we have inflation and CPI rising, the economy has been sick. It's been sick for some time. It's a debt Ponzi scheme, our economy. It's built on increasing the debt year on year on year. Asset prices go up, people feel wealthier, so then they borrow even more to go and spend and consume. And consume literally means to destroy. Look, I'm not a big fan of GDP. I rather output measurements, but when we look at GDP growth per capita, it's been slowing for decades. Now, this is Australia, but it's been slowing for decades. We have a sick economy, folks. In Australia, we've kind of embraced the immigration Ponzi scheme. So the debt Ponzi scheme wasn't quite working. So kind of since about 2005, 2006, we absolutely sent immigration through the roof. And so from a total GDP, it looked like our government leaders and that were very responsible financial managers. But actually, when you look at GDP per capita, Australia's been in recession for a long time. And Michael is my go-to guy when it comes to China and Evergrande. He says in this thread, it is harder to predict what will happen to home prices in China. They do decline far or over any length of time. Expect to see much bigger problems emerge for banks, for consumers, as negative wealth effects spread among the population. And as you guys know, I'm actually bearish over time of the Chinese economy. Their demographics, they peaked in 2011, they fall off a cliff and they just go down forever. Also, they have urbanized a lot more than expected. And so that's the other thing when you look at demographics as part of, the, economic calculations or whatever. It's also that urbanization. So people coming from, rural and rice paddy, so to speak, into the cities, into urban areas where, economic growth happens. And so they're actually quite urbanized. They're far more urbanized than people expected them to be at this point. And this is something to consider when thinking of China and Evergrande and the whole situation. Chinese $17 trillion economy, 78% of total Chinese assets are held in the property sector. In Australia, we're about 67% from memory. 30% of total GDP is in the property sector. I've shared that before. And 60 plus developers pending default. And I've also shared that that's likely to bring down the quality developers who aren't in financial strife, but simply can't get access to funding and financing from either internationally or even within China, because people are now starting to say, well, hang on, if I lend you my capital, are you going to become the next Evergrande? Are you going to, am I going to see my capital again? Am I going to see a return? And so even the good quality developers potentially could be brought down from this. And the consequences are mind-bending for sure. And Chinese bonds absolutely getting smoked. This is going to be far bigger than Evergrande, folks. The question is, will it be far bigger than China? Look, a China recession, depression will have massive knock-on effects to the global economy. I've shared this before in my video with Sam, that I think Australia is going to be hit hardest by a recession in China. But this is going to impact banks and so forth. And it's not just me saying this. And coming in from my buddy Tarek, China's Xi calls for progress on property tax in drive for prosperity. Tarek says in an essay in the ruling CCP journal, Xi called for China to vigorously and steadily advance legislation for a property tax. Just imagine how a property tax would blow up a housing market where some cities have price-to-income ratios of 43 times. And in breaking news, Goldman gets approval to take 100% ownership of its securities joint venture in China, paving the way for an aggressive expansion there. And is this why Wall Street and the big banks have been so bullish and positive on China and sucking up to the CCP? So this makes me really angry. BlackRock is literally eating the world. The world's biggest asset manager saw net inflows of $75.31 billion in a volatile quarter three, but assets stall shy of $10 trillion. The Fed's balance sheet at the same time is $8.4 trillion. BlackRock's assets, $9.4 trillion. BlackRock also buys $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities on behalf of the Fed. How nice. Powell also has millions in a BlackRock-managed S&P 500 ETF. Really one big happy family. Or we can express it in another way. The combined assets of the Fed and BlackRock alone equate to 82% of the size of the entire US economy. Add Vanguard with another $7 trillion and you're looking at 115% of GDP. Fidelity adds another $4 trillion for 134% of GDP total. Folks, this is, on this channel, we're about sound economics, Austrian economics. We don't have free market capitalism. We have corporatism, we have cronyism, we have fascism. Folks, I can tell you right now that when this all goes pear-shaped, either in a massive deflationary depression or an inflationary depression, capitalism's going to get the blame. And the media and all the financial experts on Wall Street, all of them are going to blame capitalism. And that we need stakeholder capitalism. That Klaus and his buddies have got the answer. That we need to build back better. And that we need the fourth industrial revolution. Oh, and by the way, BlackRock are also the largest landlord in the world. So think about that. And no time for puts. Inflation is transitory. I thought this picture was quite telling. Jerome Powell has a net worth of upwards of $55 million. We don't know for sure. And $11.6 million is invested in BlackRock. BlackRock, as I said, is managing the purchases of the Fed's bond buying program that keeps interest rates low, drives inflation, and enriches the 1%. This is a major conflict of interest. And as I said, we don't have free market capitalism. We have corporatism, cronyism, or fascism. And we've also found out in recent weeks that Fed insiders, presidents have been trading stocks. They've got the inside information on what the Fed are doing and what they're planning to do, etc., etc. And they're trading millions of dollars in stocks. They've since resigned, but they only resigned because they got caught. And I'd say if you guys haven't read Atlas Shrugged, or at least watched the movie, the book is much, much better, like most books or videos, movies that have been portrayed from the book. Written in 1957 and truer than ever today, when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods but in favors. When you see that men get richer by graft and by pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. And I think she was correct. And I think we are seeing this play out right before our very eyes. And now Jerome Powell has been, you'd say caught. Danielle DiMartino Booth says exposed purposefully for political reasons to get Lael Brainard as the next Fed chair, which she's definitely a sympathizer of MMT and every left-wing cause. So there's probably a lot of truth in that. However, Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell continued to trade securities from his personal account during the pandemic, including a sale of between $1 and $5 million from a total market index fund on October 1, 2020. The Dow would lose 6% that month. So Powell made 26 trades in all during 2020, most of them nominal. We don't have the dates for all the purchases and one of the sales. The October 1 sale of $1 to $5 million is notable for its size and timing, as I said just before. So here's a list of those transactions that Jerome Powell did in 2020. And you can see that it's number 23, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index sale on the 1st of October 2020 for between $1 and $5 million, which is grabbing all the headlines. And this coming in from Zero Hedge, Powell's stock trades leaked, show multi-million sale as market tanked, with leaked trades in their personal accounts already costing 2 Fed presidents their jobs, and a third Vice Chair, Richard Clarida, currently on the ropes amid speculation he will soon follow. A few weeks ago, we joked that if forces within the Fed want to get rid of all the hawks, should just leak S. George's, the Fed's last remaining uber hawk trading record. And lo and behold, Fed Powell, his trading has been leaked. And you can see down the bottom here, once again, these ultra leftist socialists would try to kill Powell's candidacy by leaking his trades in hopes of getting the Fed's resident socialist, Lyle Brainard, to replace Powell amid the growing storm over Fed trades. And I think this is now the likely bet to happen, folks. So once again, everything we do in the investment world is not looking at today, not necessarily looking in the past, although we can learn from the past, but trying to project, as Stan Druckenmiller says, try to project where we're going to be in 18 months' time or so. And that's pretty much what I try to do, and how I allocate my portfolio based on where things are going, not where they are today. So I think we're going to see more of a dovish, left-leaning, MMT sympathizing Fed moving forward. And obviously that, to me, that's going to be extremely inflationary. And it's obviously Lyle Brainard has already talked about things like climate, words that I cannot say. So anyway, watch this space very carefully. I'd certainly recommend reading this article about China playing the long game while the US blows bubbles. And Stan Druckenmiller, I don't know if he's read much on Austrian economics, but he's pretty much summed up sound Austrian economics right here. We should try capitalism for a change. Capitalism allows for business and personal financial failure, creative destruction. It enables borrowers and savers to set interest rates. Oh, gee, forbid that, eh? Capitalism incentivizes productive uses of its resources. Sounds very Austrian economics and very sound advice from Stan. Now, Stan gives us another piece of wise advice when it comes to investing. Never ever invest in the present. It doesn't matter what a company is earning, what they have earned. You must visualize the situation 18 months from now. And whatever that is, that's where the price will be, not where it is today. And that's what I do. That's why I try to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Not to work out what's happened now, what's happened in the past. Yes, that can give us a bit of a guideline. But to work out what's going to happen in the future. And that's how we value stocks and measure future cash flows and whatnot as well. But that's the art of things.
But let's start with the Fed and inequality. I don't think there has been any greater engine of inequality than the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States the last 11 years. So hearing the chairman talk about visiting homeless shelters is very, very rich indeed. I just had the best year I've had in 15 years last year. Everyone wealthy I know is making a fortune. And why are we making it? Because this guy is printing money like there's no tomorrow. And the kids in Harlem, in my opinion, are not benefiting from money printing, but Stan Druckenmiller and other wealthy people are. So for the life of me, I can't figure out why the left is so excited about money printing when all the data says the people that benefit from money printing are rich people that know how to navigate the markets. The odds-on bet is we're going to have inflation. And inflation is going to hurt poor people, again, a lot more than rich people. How does this thing end? To me, the asset bubble, which he's blowing up into unbelievable proportions, busts before the inflation ever really manifests itself. That's what happened with the housing thing in 08, 09. We never really got to the inflation because the asset bubble burst. Not dissimilar to what happened in 29. That's not my central case, but let me just say, we've never had a deflationary bust because inflation was too close to zero or 1.5 instead of 2. We've had them because we've had these tremendous asset bubbles. It happened here in 29. It happened in Japan in 90. And obviously it happened in the great financial crisis. And there is no one, no group that will get hurt more by a bust than the poor. They will be first in line to get screwed. Trust me.
And the wealthiest 10% of Americans own a record 89% of all US stocks. Let's cut to a clip.
Okay, let's talk about the rise of retail traders during the pandemic. Robert Frank's been tracking stock market wealth, and he joins us now. Hey, Robert.
Good morning, Joe. Millions of new investors opened trading accounts during the pandemic. Robinhood alone added over 10 million accounts, now at over 22 million. But stock market wealth has not become more democratized. In fact, it's become more concentrated. According to the latest Fed data, the top 1% now owns 54% of all stocks. The top 10% owns 90%. Both are at all-time records. There are three main reasons for these higher concentrations. First of all, the new retail investors, they're large in number but small in account size. The average Robinhood account now at about $4,000, smaller, although younger than those at, say, Vanguard or Schwab. And new investors also bought at higher prices, so their upside may not have been as large, and they are more likely to trade rather than buy or hold, especially these volatile stocks. So their returns have been a little bit lower. The top 1% had stock gains of over 43% over the past year. That compares with about 33% return for the bottom 90% of investors. Guys, so these guys are doing well. We're happy they're in the market. We'd like to see this wealth more broadly distributed.
Right. But then again, there's another example of rising asset values. I guess we already know that. They benefit people who have assets. So is that good or bad? It's good.
Look, the stock market is the greatest wealth creation machine in the world. It's great that it's now more broadly owned. We want the spoils of that market to be widely distributed. And that's why, we want these investors to be in the market. We want them to stay in, and we want them to invest rather than trade over the long term.
Housing, you want people to own houses, but then you see what happens when you try and make it too easy to own houses. We've dealt with that, but it's the upper, who owns houses? I don't know what percentage, but when housing goes up, that seems to benefit the wealthy. Anything that goes up is what you want because it's also a reflection of the underlying economy. Usually, there's a reason why things are like the stock market go up. So it's really, we're in a weird place.
Yeah.
Let's stop that. I can't watch this anymore. That's Macron right there. Hey, look at his the restrictions that he's placed on his citizens while he's out partying. Nah, this makes me angry. So everything that's happening in the world at the moment really feels like I'm living in the middle of a very bad sci-fi movie. And we're seeing freedoms and liberties being destroyed over the last 18 months. We've seen the economy be destroyed, people's lives be destroyed. We're seeing some pretty frightening things being promoted by Wall Street, the banking institutions, central banks, these government bodies, these institutions like the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the IMF, you name it. And some say that this move that we're making is just an excuse for global communism. Whatever it is, it's not something that I'm looking forward to. But I'll finish up with this. Dominic Perrottet, who is the new Premier of New South Wales, our largest populated state in Australia. He's been saying a lot of good things over the past 12 months. He's only just become Premier, so I'm prepared to give him a bit of time. But I hope he lives up to the values that he's been at least pushing out of his own mouth. He said this: people born in this country by default are free. It's not the government's role to provide freedom. And I agree with him, and I'm going to hold him to account. And we should hold all of our government leaders to account for our freedoms and our liberties, which are so important that we all should fight for. Anyway, guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. Love to see your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you again on another episode of Finance Uncut.